Hello, good morning in Mexico and good afternoon in South Africa. Welcome everyone to our literary seminar series, Mexican and South African Writers in Conversation. It is a pleasure for us today to have two magnificent writers, Henrietta Rose Inez, who is going to talk about her book Ninive, and Julian Herbert, who is going to also talk about his book Tom Song or Canción de tumba. Thank you also to our moderator, Dr. Armando Velasquezotto, from the School of Philosophy and Literature at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. And before we start, I would like to thank all our colleagues that have made this seminar possible. Thank you to our Unam colleagues, Anel Perez, who is the head of Literatura Unam. Thank you very much to Carla Morales and Julia Santibáñez, who are coordinate also the Carlos Fuentes Extraordinary Chair. And then at the University of the Witwatersrand, I also would like to thank our colleague, Dr. Bronwyn Law-Filion, who is the head of creative writing at the School of Literature, Language and Media. Also, thank you very much to our interpreter, Monica Monroy, who, I mean, this is, and also our South African, Unam South Africa team for making this possible. Thank you very much again, everyone. And then I will give the floor to Bronwyn. Thank you, Bronwyn.
Thank you, Arturo. Just want to start my video. Thanks, Arturo. I'm delighted to be able to welcome everyone who's tuned in to this conversation between Julian Herbert and Henrietta Rose Inez. The School of Literature, Language and Media at Wits is pleased to be able to co-host this with Unam and the Cátedra Carlos Fuentes in Mexico. Thank you, Arturo, for all of your work, and to Carla Morales for the work that you're doing in Mexico to make this series possible. I'd like to introduce our moderator today, Dr. Armando Ottavio Velasquezotto, who has a PhD in literature from Unam, where he is currently a full-time scholar in the Hispanic Literature program in the School of Philosophy and Literature, working in the field of Latin American literature from the 15th to the 21st centuries. He's part of the Mexican National System of Researchers, a member of the Seminar on Contemporary Latin American Narrative, and the network Futures Under Construction in the Global South. He coordinated the volume La Memoria Cursena Lo que Une, critical readings on the work of Julian Herbert, and helped coordinate Literatures in Mexico, Poetics and Interventions, as well as Liminal Fictions, Mexican Narrative of the Beginning of the 21st Century, published in 2021. Armando, thank you very much for agreeing to moderate this conversation between Julian and Henrietta. So I would like to hand over to you now. Although before I do, just to let everyone who's joined us know that the conversation will take about 45 minutes. And after that, we'll open up to questions from those of you who are listening in. You'll notice at the bottom of your screen, there's a little icon for interpretation. So if you need to listen in English or in Spanish, you will be able to do that by clicking on that icon and selecting the language that you're wanting to listen to. So thank you all of us for joining us, and over to you, Armando.
Well, thank you very much, Bronwyn, for this introduction. I am very happy to be here. I am glad to conduct this conversation between these two great writers, Julian Herbert and Henrietta Rose Inez. And well, we have the opportunity to read the book of one of the books of Henrietta in Spanish, because fortunately we have this translation made by Almadía. The translator was Ana Marimón Driven, and as a part of the conversation and as a topic that Julian put on the table, we are going to start with the topic of translation, the importance of the translation in the circulation of literature in the world. And well, I think that for me, it was very difficult to read the book in English, but as I said, fortunately, I have this translation. So I think that we can begin this conversation with the topic of translation. And well, let's start at Julian and Henrietta with this conversation, please. I don't know if some of you want to say something about the translation, the importance of this, and after that we can talk about some topics related with some of your books. And well, let's start, I think.
Well, I don't know if I could start maybe, and just because I brought just because I brought the topic to the table. So I just want to say that what you were saying. I want to take that the difficulty of languages like Spanish and English that is a very geographical big languages, and this the use in the different countries and the specifics of English language in South Africa. For me, it was too. I feel the rhythm of the prose, and it's a beautiful, really beautiful and very profound book. But many I was losing many layers. I saw that when I read the translation by Anna Marie Moore, that I think is a beautiful work, and she works with the music of the prose, trying to bring it to Spanish, and I think it's a great work. And I was thinking about my relationship with Christina McSweeney, who's my translator in English, and it's for me it's a very collaborative and very close work, because working with Christina for me is not has been not just the work with she makes me think a lot about how is my process of writing, because she asks the right questions, not just about the translation, but about the concept of language and things of rhetorics and like mental process. So I was thinking to we maybe Henrietta want to talk about. It's more like a question about this process with working with translators and how they finally influence our process. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you for bringing this up. It's a complicated topic. I feel very conscious of my privilege as a first language English speaker and writer, even that this conversation now is happening in English. But it also puts one in quite an odd position as a translated writer, in that I don't really speak any other languages. You know, I can read very crudely in a couple of European languages. So to distribute your work to the world in other languages is really this act of enormous trust and faith. And I can never really know other than by hearing it so delightfully from people like you that it's been done well. You know, so it is wonderful to hear that. I haven't actually experienced for myself that kind of extreme involvement in the process that you talk about. I'd love to have that experience at some point. My experiences with translation have been more at arm's length. but it is necessarily always like this extremely intimate experience nonetheless. And the particular things that a translator from another country will be puzzled by or choose to ask for new nuance about are always fascinating, because they invariably give you a little insight into what, for example, myself as a South African English speaker has taken so for granted about my cultural context. I think I don't. This is quite a sensitive area, because my Spanish translator is no longer with us. I'm not sure if the people here knew my translator. I'm sure a few of you did, and that for me has been an enormous regret. I did come to Mexico a few years ago to launch the book in the Spanish edition, and it was the visit was really structured around the chance to meet her. Because it had been this strangely distant yet intimate relationship, and we were both sort of going to solidify the relationship when I met her in Mexico City, and as it turned out, that never happened. I missed a flight. She had to go be somewhere. It didn't happen, and for me, there's an enormous absence in my. Yeah, I feel that there was a relationship there that never really fully got translated into real life. Yeah, still a strange gap for me.
Okay, thank you both of them for the answers. I think that maybe we can talk about some topics that I found in Ninive, but also in your work, Julian. As you know, I am a huge fan of your work. So recently I had the opportunity to read one of your latest books, Ahora Imagino Cosas, and I found some interesting relationships between two books, mainly with one of the chronics in the book, Acapulco Timeless, and the construction of the city of this complex of apartments in Ninive. And I think that maybe we can talk about the city, how the cities are always changing, and how the cities are always evolving into something that sometimes we don't know. And well, I mean that cities are always changing, and not always for the good reasons. So for me, it was amazing in Ninive to see this big complex of apartments, and surrounded the complex these poor people living from the scratches of the complex. And I think that is a very frequent situation in Mexico and also in South Africa. And as you wrote, Julian, in Acapulco Timeless, the cities are always growing, not growing through the sky. And that doesn't mean that the life of the people in the cities is going to a better place. So what do you think about this, about the cities in the global south, about the cities in literature, and why do you choose this topic to your work?
Well, it's a great question, because when I was reading Ninive, my first thing was like, this is like the archaeological places in the Mayan region, like this complex of apartments, brand new and ready to be inhabited, but there's like this kind of old cities ruins, and I think it's beautiful. There's the contrast between nature and this idea, the city as an idea that it's already broken from the beginning, and that for me is a beautiful concept, that like Benjamin's dialectical image, that how the words collide in nature and civilization, if you can say that word still. But what you're saying about my relationship with Acapulco, I think is this kind of relationship that this city that I met is like the not just the remainings or the ruins of a city, but the ruins of an aspiration too. No, I think Acapulco is for me. I was born there in 1971, and when I was born, Acapulco still was has this aura of paradise, but it was just at the end of it. And when for me, my memory from the 80s, the city was already broken, and that's the relationship I have with this city. But in other sense, I think it's something that happens with this idea of South and North. I think it's very clever because this feeling of not quite the vision of a future, but the relationship between the city and the past, and how the time it's always deteriorating, even the brand new stuff. That's just an idea.
Yeah, I mean, I read that relates very much to what I was trying to grasp in Ninive. So this in the world of the novel, this brand new housing estate is being built on an ancient swampland, and it is in the course of the book, it's infiltrated by all these bugs and beasts, and is infiltrated by uncontrollable forces of the non-human world. So I think in the context of South African history in particular, I think that's quite a resonant idea, because our history is very much a sequence of historical eras where people attempted to impose a control and a segregated order and a compartmentalization onto the world. And in each case, those attempts at imposing order have failed. And I think that the idea I was trying to explore with the book is that kind of loss of control and that crumbling away is inevitable and perhaps can be embraced. And it's written from the point of view of someone, I was also born in 1971, of someone who has witnessed their familiar city altered in inconceivable ways, in a way that challenges nostalgia and challenges a sense of control. And I think writing that book was a way of trying to work through ecological ideas, but also a personal sense of allowing borders to crumble, and to embrace and accept it. It's interesting that you bring up the idea of the past and the future. I don't think the future was in my mind at all when I was writing that book. I think it was, I was, very much letting the main character end at the end of the book with no sense of where her life was going or where the city was going, and somehow being able to be at peace to some degree with that loss of control.
Thank you. The idea of a future, it's a powerful idea, but as Henrietta said, after I read the book, I was thinking, after I read Ninive, what will happen with Katia. Now, at the end of the book, she's living in her van. She's wandering around the city. She's still working and so on. But also from the beginning of the book, her house is falling down, and at the end of the book, the house is there, but she's not living in the house anymore. So it was this idea of the city for me. It became, after reading the book and also the chronicle, that the city, for a lot of people, the city is not a place to live. It's just a place to work, or it's just a place to wandering, but it's not anymore the place to live. So for me, that was pretty hard to understand. But I think that maybe that one of the ideas of that the book gave me is that the city as this place that is not longer to live in. What do you think about the change of the city, the change of the relationships between people? Because I think that one very important aspect of Ninive, and also one big aspect in Canción de Tumba, is the hard relationship between fathers and son, but also between the people. How we relate with others, what we have in common, what things we don't agree. But I think that in Ninive and also in Canción de Tumba, the relationship between the sons, the daughters, and the fathers or the mother, it's very, very hard and very, very sometimes very difficult to understand. At the end of Ninive, I don't know how to think about the relationship between Katia and his father, but also the relationship that her nephew has with his own mother. So it's difficult to understand this kind of relationship. What do you think about it? About this kind of issues?
Well, I think from the beginning, what I think that two books share is this idea about the relationship between generations as something that goes more than just the idea of generation. Once I interviewed Chuck Palahniuk, and he told me he wasn't writing about a generation, but the moment of one's life when you begin to see that you are the heir of a concept of the world and civilization and genealogy, cultural and biologically. So I think these two books have, I think, this kind of relationship with time, not just about how my generation see the history, but how the cycles of history confront us. And I think one of the things for me is when you say about the relationship between the nephew and his mother, or when I think about the relationship between Guadalupe Chavez and his son in Samsung, I think there are like daring, because they are not like an idea about a relationship, but an actual relation. So, and sometimes in Mexico, they are talking about disruptive motherhood and like a new stuff. And I think for me, that's just an idea. Motherhood is disruptive always, and fatherhood too. I think this kind of relationship can't be like this idea we have. So narratives are working with this is the process for me. The process when you take the mimesis, the construction of a scene about the relationship between different generations and fathers and sons, etc., it can't be controlled by the idea of this concept. We need to put it in scene, and this is always painful and complex, and it's not there are no happy endings nowhere in this kind of experience. And the only happiness for me in this process is the irony, the possibility of some kind of distance of sense about through language, this sense of how ridiculous is always this process. We idealize it a lot, how funny it is, because like Dave Chappelle says, everything is very funny unless it happens to you.
So yeah, I mean, I was very struck by certain parallels as well. So I read Tombsong, and I was struck by the ambivalence of the relationship between the the son and the mother in that book. And it did make me think about how I'd chosen to depict the father-daughter relationship in Ninive. What struck me was kind of the emphasis on physical intimacy. So in Ninive, Katja becomes kind of grossly intimate with her father's body that kind of repulses her. And it's something that sort of rings true to me in my own life experience of having to care also for my mother in her last illness as well. And for me, that was a kind of a stand-in for an attempt by someone who's living an atomized life, and a life removed from her fellow citizens and quite distant from personal relationships, to encounter the previous generation and her own immediate history and her own relationships with her fellow city dwellers in the only way that she could, which is by this rather strange, emotionally distant, but physically perhaps too close exploration of bodies across the generations, which it feels quite sort of medicalized almost, as in that context, it's one of the only ways that somebody like that can actually really approach intimacy with the mother figure or the father figure. And I think in Katja's case, it's also a stand-in for some kind of intimate face-to-face interaction with her fellow citizens, coming from a country where those relationships have historically been distant and segregated and separated. But there's a strong layer of paradoxical disgust, I think, particularly in that story. Which again is something that she has to countenance and encounter in order for her to get close to anybody at all. Yeah.
Thank you. Another topic that I saw in Ninive and also in your books, Julian, is related with this idea of modernity, not the future, but how the cities are always evolving in order to achieve some goal of modernity. But also, I saw in Ninive and in some of the chronicles of Ahora Imagino Cosas that the transformation of the cities always imply a kind of violence against the population, against the people who live in the cities. How how this idea of modernity is always modifying things, but also it's violent against people. So I was thinking in these cities in transition that also are cities that I forgot the word in English, that are cities that expel people outside and that destroy the space, that change the streets, that always are making this violence against the population. So what do you think about the idea of the modernity related with the cities in your books? Because in Ninive, it's for me, it was really, really clear, because also the house of Katia is falling down because of the new construction that is growing in front of her house. And at the end, he moves out and the construction continue. In some of the texts that you wrote, Julián, for Ahora Imagino Cosas, that happened. We have these amazing futuristic buildings surrounded by poor people, surrounded by these villas miseria, poor houses, and it seems that these kind of cities are the cities of the global south. I'm not thinking that is true, but that is very common, that we saw these amazing buildings surrounded by this house made of garbage and so on. So what do you think about this? Because one of the topics of the conversation was related with violence, and I think that we can see violence very, very clear here in the construction of the city and how this changed the life of people, not always for the best, I think. What do you think about this?
Well, I did, the first thing I think is like there is always a conversation in these topics, very important for the society, and there's always a change of subject from the capitalism or politics. Always a change of topics. We can talk about that, but later, because now we have to talk about architecture. Now we have to talk about the law. Now we have to talk about integrate, etc. All these concepts not to talk about violence, racism, displace of people, destruction of nature. These topics are always in a secondary agenda, and I think what we in literature used to do, and I think you don't need to be like obviously political, because if you're a writer and you are interested in this underground places and these layers that have reality, you're always politically involved, because this is where the very interesting and very complex narratives are happening. So I think it's in these days, but I think in every moment since Stendhal, when you want to go to the Jews, to the very complex and profound narratives, you have to take these political topics, and for me, every aspect is connected, and I want to tell like a little moment in Thompson. There is this idea of the hospital, and in this hospital in Saltillo, the city where I live, it's first, if you see it from upstairs, you can see this. It has the shape of an airplane, It's very, very rare. But also, if you go to search the story of the construction of the hospital, it was constructed with money people donated to support the World War II. And the Mexican president say, no, take this money, I don't need it, use it for something in your city. And so they construct the hospital with the remains of the rich people from the city wanted to participate in a war. So they say they was telling no. So they made the hospital with the shape of an airplane, and for me it's a question, it's very funny question, but also looks like how violence can be represented even in the shape of a hospital, and how the people of a city is more interested in the ideas of glory than in people that's dying of disease in your own city. And I think there's a metaphor, and maybe if we dive into more of the novels in the 20th century, 21st century, we can find this kind of what Walter Benjamin's called dialectical images, because they're always a building, a poster, a movie that reflects this collide of injustice. I'm thinking now about a novel, Chronic by Yuri Herrera, who puts like a kiosco, this construction of in a park that represents how the people of this city in Pachuca let a group of miners die and never pay to the families for their death in a fire. And there's always these representations, and so for a novelist, I think it's not quite difficult to find this material representations of injustice, violence, and in ultimate place like treason to the idea of human being.
Yeah, I mean, I think writing in a South African context specifically, but I think probably not too dissimilarly in the Mexican context as well. It is impossible to write about land, about the division of land, about the historical claims to land, without the inherent violence of that being overt and very much on the surface. So that is, inexorably part of the subject matter of writing about building. I'm writing about architecture in the South African context. So that was always top of my mind when writing Ninive, and I would think would be quite the violence inherent in that landscape would be quite apparent to anybody reading the book. I think talking about structures of modernity, I mean, I think the point about Ninive, the architecture of Ninive, is that it's that kind of gleaming newness is something that my characters desire to own and to claim, and they hope that it will protect them from the ongoing chaos of the landscape, but it is necessarily illusory. The permanence of it and the pristine nature of it is illusory. It is always in flux, and it is always collapsing. And I think what I tried to do with that character is actually her only route to salvation is not to try to protect herself with those high white walls, but in a way to sort of accept the kind of radical humility of ending up with no walls at all, sleeping in her car. And it's a kind of mortification, which ultimately seems to be the the only way out to break down those illusory walls of the gleaming city. Which ultimately seems to be the only way out to break down those.
We have a microphone on. Okay, thank you. Yes. Also, another of the topics of the conversation, besides violence, it's related with migration and the human mobility around the world. For me, it was really interesting that at the end of Ninive, Katia chose to live in her van and to move around the city, sleeping in different places every night. And I think that that's a different way to inhabit the city, not having this place fixed to live, but always moving around the cities. And that's pretty difficult to understand for the rest of the people who lived in houses and so on. Why someone choose to live in the movement, in the way for saying something. So what do you think about these representations in literature of movement and migration, and at the end different ways of living, not necessarily related with this idea of the security of a house or a place to stay in? What do you think about it? And well, we have some questions of the public, and well, we can read it in a few minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I want to say first that I think this question is related with the previous one, because this eruption of modernity and this idealization of architecture breaks places and generates, for me, this is an idea, generates inner borders. So we live surrounded by inner borders, and for me it's very sensitive. I passed my childhood in a small town which name is Ciudad Frontera, like Frontera City, and people say childhood is destiny. So for me, the idea of borders is very interiorized. And I see things like, for example, now I'm passing some days in Colonia Roma, and the next place in Mexico City is the next barrio, neighborhood is Doctores, and you can see the Cuauhtemoc Avenue as a border because there are a lot more light in the night in Roma than in Doctores. And that's that kind of inner borders are always present. I think we can see it in constructions. It's evident in Ninive when Katia, for example, goes out the complex and has this trip to the mall, it's very, very evident this. So for me, migration has it's about looking for this place that you lost when the new border was constructed, and you need to reconnect, and maybe it's not just, it's of course it's a political search, but it's also a spiritual journey for me. The people that is making this, the process of migration, we always talk about it in the sense of social affair, but not like a spiritual one. And I think I don't want to be too extensive with this, but I think this is a question for my experience. I was born in the south of Mexico and lived most of my life in the north, and that this is something that many people in Mexico don't see like migration, the inner migration from south to north. But for me, it was a very profound and characteristic experience. And it's not just, of course, we live in different cities. We were always traveling because of my mother's work and so on. But I wrote about that in Tom Song. But I think this is a process that to construct the no place, the inner no place, because that's a very profound experience. And I think it's a very revolutionary experience too, because the idea of conquer the place, the idea of modern cities that you were talking about before, I think it's goes against this interior experience of fluid principles in the mind, but it is an option for many of us, not just a question of surviving, but also a possibility.
I'm sorry, moving around. Yeah, I mean, I think again, to go back to that image of my protagonist in her car, I mean, I think in that particular situation, it's also a gesture towards giving up claim of ownership, which claim of ownership to a piece of land, to a particular historical moment, to a history. And I think with a white protagonist in a South African novel, that has a very particular resonance. But I think also, on the other hand, I also use images of migration, particularly with the animal figures in the book, as an image of flexibility and resilience as well. And not in a sort of a triumphal, invasive kind of way, but more a kind of an infiltration, a subtle infiltration, and an ability to adapt and change, which is a more positive and hopeful reading of it. And in what I've been writing more recently, I've been trying to explore that more. In fact, I have been trying to write a novel which kind of completes the arc of the novel series that started with Ninive, which I wanted to be more about resilience and hopefulness, and it is all about migration, looking at it through the lens of the plant world, dispersion of plants. But I kind of hit a bit of a wall with that, because the last couple of years have not felt like a particularly resilient time for any of us, I think, for me personally, and also there's been this radical shutdown on freedom of movement with the pandemic as well. So it hasn't been the most sympathetic time to be writing a book about free migration and resilience. I do hope that the world gets back to that, because that is still the arc that I want to explore. Yeah.
Thank you for the answers. We have some questions of the public. One big question related with the topics that we were talking about, the cities. Roberto Cruz asked, do you think your relation with the city and its outskirts, from a global perspective, all the big cities connected each other, or in a regional sense, the big cities which are surrounded by layers of inequality? Well, that's the question. It's a huge question, I think. How do you think the city, all the cities related, or the cities related with what's surrounded?
Yes, for me, the experience is now I'm constructing this for me. This is in process, because I live in a quite small city in the region near to the desert, and for me, this microsystem, I thought I understood that microsystem, and I wrote about that, and I was very integrated to that. And for me, it was an experience in flesh, and there was another experience like living in the virtual world, etc. And I think with the pandemics in the first place, it changes a lot, because my relationship with the digital world make me think differently about distance, conceptual distance. And one of the things that happened is that this particular year, I have passed most of the time out of my city, out of my house, and living in different places. I'm looking for this idea. Matsuo Basho said that the world is a hostel. And for me, this experience of being in different cities, in different rooms, not knowing quite well, next week I'm going to be in Los Angeles, then I go back to my home like 3 days. And for me, this is an experience of connection. So it's a process. I don't know quite yet, but what I think is this is a question that you have to experience in the moment.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think I occupy several different models of what a city is simultaneously. I relate to what you're saying, Julian, about I have my local, I have my super local environment, and then I also have this sense of a sort of spider web of internet connections that at times can feel very much closer to me. Connecting these conceptual places that can feel very much closer to me than spots on the real landscape. I just listening to you talk, I had the thought that I wonder if people who live in, say, Europe have quite a different sense of this. I too live in a small place, quite remote physically. I'm actually in a hotel room right now because I live in a small village and I have to come into town frequently. So sometimes I stay in one of these generic hotel rooms just to make my life a little bit easier, which explains the bad wallpaper behind me. But so yeah, I think I know my house very intimately. I know 50 meters around my house a little bit less intimately, and there are these circles of different intimacy that somehow will coexist with also my ability to get on a plane and be abruptly in another city, in another world altogether. Although again, that part of my geographical sense of things has also shrunk dramatically in the last couple of years. It used to be a big part of my sense of being living in an interconnected world, which has kind of shriveled away from me, to be quite honest, in the last 2 years. I live very local now. The last couple of things that I've written have been about the spiders living in my couch, and that's the kind of extensive world that I've been occupying recently.
Thank you. We have another question. It's a huge one also. In your novels, the characters deal with pain and loss, and it's noticeable that sometimes the language is not enough to express that intensity of emotions. How do you deal from your own experience to translate? And it's interesting because we now go back to the first question, to translate the human experiences, the human pain into words. How do you deal with that?
Well.
I think you just jumped to it. No, I'm going to for these questions I want to I feel like answering with very present stuff. So I want to say that, and last Friday I had a medical procedure. So unexpected medical procedure. So now I'm in pain, physically in pain. And for me, it was I was very, I have a lot of anxiety before we began. Let me confess to you that, because this is the first time that I have to speak in English in pain, and it's a language I never studied. My English is from the radio. So for me it was, and now this like this 2 or 3 last years I have to speak a lot in English in this kind of meetings, because of I'm working doing like scripts and some stuff in English. So the sum of these questions for me is I have very anxious, and I'm always thinking I'm doing in the bad way. For me, it's like feeling like I'm being ridiculous, and it's unpleasant sometimes, and it's kind of funny too. And at the end, it's I think I have to trust in people like you to be kind with me. So for me, the experience of writing a novel is not different from that. It's you have to trust in to go through the anxiety, trust in people, and being aware that you are making ridiculous stuff, and you have to do it because you have to.
I'm very sorry to hear that you're in pain, Julian. I thank you for being here, and it's kind of suddenly a little bit weird for me because I've also had my medical issues, and to be honest, this is the first time I am appearing in any kind of public sense talking about my work since that has happened to me, and I was too extremely anxious about this, and trusting all these lovely people here to be kind with us. So that's yet another curious correlation there. And I do appreciate you jumping in and just naming that as well. I think you're probably a braver writer than me in that sense as well. I mean, I have dealt with pain and loss in my writing, but I try to hide it as I try to hide the realities of that as much as possible. You know, when I wrote about my mother dying, I did it by writing about an extinct lion rather than, you know, walking straight up to the hospital bed. And I do admire that frankness. I don't really know how else to say it. It's something I approach very cautiously and very much sideways as a writer. And perhaps that is a gap in my skill, or lack in my own bravery as a writer. It's something that's, again, to be quite personal, it's something that's on my mind a lot at the moment, because I've been asked to write quite directly about my medical issues, and I don't really know how I feel about that. But it does seem that the writing that I'm doing that is more metaphorical, that is more removed, that is more refracted, is just not really working at the moment. And it does feel like it is also related to geopolitics on some level, not to be pretentious, but it does really feel like there is so much very literal pain and suffering and violence going on that I'm not quite sure how one is supposed to address that, if not directly right now as a writer. That's kind of how I'm feeling.
Thank you, and thank you both of them for being here despite the pain the difficulties, because I know that it's very, very hard to talk about it. And thank you for that. We have another question, but I don't know. Arturo from Unam, Sudafrica, have this question, but I don't know if he's connected. Yeah. Go on, Arturo. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, it's a little bit long, and I just wanted. Sorry, I don't have power because now my power just. I don't have any power, so you'll just see me a little bit darkness. Sorry, now these are the things we have to deal with also in South Africa, but it's also very related to the Mexican context. So, okay, I just want to go back to the topic of these relationships and generations that you talked about before, because I was very intrigued about this in your case, Julian, in Canción de Tumba, this mother-son relationship with an absent father, and in your case is exactly the opposite. It's a daughter and father relationship with an absent mother, and what I sort of perceived is that in your case, Julian, there is this sort of anger, well, also a difficult relationship with this archetype that we have of what a mother and entails in Mexico, particularly, to sort of openly criticize and actually say what we feel about the mother, And I really like that openness that you have in your book, because it's very straightforward, it's very frank, and you really show this feeling about the mother. But also I sort of sensed like several layers, like, I don't know, like it's also like a dual relationship, because sometimes it's like a little bit more distant with calling her Marisela, and then sometimes it's Guadalupe, and sometimes it's Lupita. So it's also like different layers of approaching the mother, and I think it's a combination of this anger, but also sense of she is my mother. So there is also this sensation that I felt of feeling close to the mother. And in your case, Henrietta, I think it's also interesting, the silence and the probably non-talking about the feelings instead of the anger that is expressed in Tom's song. And I think it's very interesting because Alma, Katia's sister, never talks about this. It's a very, very deep, dead silence about what happened to the mother. And Katia doesn't also feel like opening the conversation. Katia and Alma, they don't really talk about this, but there is also this sense of feeling of this absent mother, but also the relationship with Katia and the father, whereas for me it's like there is also some sort of guilt in Katia that maybe pushes back to her father, but this anger that pushes away from her father. So I would like to hear more about these sort of relationships, and particularly this mother-son relationship and daughter-father relationship. And maybe if you think it would be different if it was like in your case, probably Julian, father, son, father. So this, I'm talking about gender now. How does that play also an important role in your books from both of you?
Well, for the first, I want to say that I think this, in my experience, I don't know if it's a matter of class too, but I think in lower classes in Mexico, we might write about it or not, but this is a very strong structure. No, this relationship with your mother, with an absent father, is always there. That's a statistical experience for me. It's not just statistical, but I think for millions of Mexicans, this is the relationship. And I think the question about gender for me, it's I think it's very important in the discussion, because I think it's something that we have interiorized, but there are not a long years before since we are talking about this. For me, the process of discovering this simple idea that the relationship between my mother and I was a relation about gender is not like something I thought in the first place. For me, just this idea of the mother, no. But I think this process of the different layers and the different names might be some kind of construct these stations and distances. When you for someone like me, it's a way to construct the complex relationship, not just with the mother, but the gender relations and how it works in generations too. I don't know. I'm thinking also that these different words. I'm thinking more in this about the names. No, my mother was named Guadalupe, but she uses the name Marisela. And there was in the novel, there are a lot of discussion about the names and the name as a ghost. And for me, this is a very important issue because it brings to the al primer plano, to the front, up front, the question that we are being different. And in ideology, what I don't like about ideology is that it put the things like just in one place. It cannot be moved from there. And I'm not talking about just the power of ideology, but ideology in general tends to make the things very in order. And for me, this relationship between, for example, the relationship between gender and names, it puts like there are functions, there are movement in gender is moving too. I'm moving in my own gender, and my mother is moving in her own gender. And for me, this complex movement is very important to be reflected in narratives.
Yeah, I mean, I think my writing is quite strongly gendered or concerned with gender, although I've never really explicitly thought that to myself. And I think it is really, all my books are just a series of me attempting to work through my own quite private family and personal mythology, which is gendered. And when I think about it, it is all about a kind of an absence and ungraspable intimacy and warmth with the female and the mother, and probably a kind of an aspirational hardness and vibrancy that is to do with the father and the male. And I certainly wouldn't say that those are universal things. I think those are really quite specific to my life experience. Although I'm sure that they do have broader resonance. I hope they have broader resonance. So when I think about it, I think that is really simply why those choices were made. But I do think they do seem to resonate with people. Yeah, when I think about what other books that I've written that tackle, again, quite sideways family relationships. For example, in my book Green Lion, the relationship of warmth and loving intimacy is also one of absence with the main protagonist and the lioness, who is quite specifically a female lion. And I think in Ninive, the mother figure had to be absent, because the book is really about aspiring to that quite generically masculine desire for dominance and violence and dominance embodied by the father and by the housing estate itself, by the very architecture, that those things that it represents. That's what Katia desires and aspires to, and that's what also oppresses her, and that she must reject ultimately. So in the particular structure of that book, it made sense for the mother not to be an extremely powerful figure, but rather an absence, because those were not the things that she is struggling with specifically. Yeah, she's struggling more with this rapacious and aspirational desire to impose order. Yeah, which in both my own and I think more universal mythologies is coded masculine.
Thank you. We have another question. Bronwyn, we can hear you. Yeah.
Hi, thanks, Armando. I'm struck listening to you both, and also through reading your very different novels. I mean, in a way, there are, as Armando has pointed out, many concerns that are mutual. You know, that you both, the concerns that you share in these novels, but in other ways they're very different novels. And the difference is perhaps a formal difference, or a question of it's a question of idiom. And I realize, of course, Julian, that I'm reading your novel in translation. It seems to me a very good translation, but I'm struck in reading it by the way you are grappling with the kind of local idiom that's expressed not only in language but in references to many sort of local ideas and images and names and structures. And the same is true in your novel, Henrietta, except that your references are so much more oblique. And I wondered if both of you could talk about language as a way of approaching the questions that you're raising. You know, Henrietta, your language seems to me to sort of come at these issues in a kind of, as you yourself say, you're not a writer who necessarily confronts these things in a sort of overt, head-on way, but you're coming through metaphor. You're coming at it from an interesting angle. I mean, the metaphor in Ninive is of pest control. You know, we've got to sort of control the pests, and we've got to control the things that are going to possibly overtake the world and overtake our lives. And of course, it's functioning as a metaphor for South African society, for things that you're seeing in your own city in Cape Town, but you know, for bigger issues that are both local and global. And Julian, your approach from the point of view of language seems to me to kind of address very strongly and very directly and very, in some ways, very crudely and funnily through language, some of the issues that you're interested in very beautiful prose, but very different prose. And I wonder if you would both talk about that, perhaps in reference to each other, to your experience of each other's prose, as well as to your own working through of language and its relationship to ideas and metaphors and images.
Yes, okay. Well, I will take the rhythm we were bringing. I think first I think there's a question. There's a matter of cognitive perception beneath the whole question, and I'm guessing. I'm just guessing, but I think the perception of the world Henrietta has is very, very connected with a visual perspective of the small stuff around you, and it's I think her power of observation is amazing, and you can see that in the prose, in the rhythm of how the mimesis of the narratives flows. And I'm thinking maybe what I learned about me in the process of being a writer is that I have a more sharp perception in sounds, more than visually. And for me, the word begins with sounds, and maybe I'm just guessing. it's some kind of difference between writers in general, but between we both this how cognitives. I think I'm thinking in cognitive poetics, and how this process of constructing rhetorics, it's determinate some for the neurobiological process, and that's one idea. And the other one is like landscape and style, and of course the place you live in. This kind of experience for me, this experience of being very direct in language, it has a relation with the notion that I live in the north of Mexico, with this particular border with United States culture, with pop very near my daily life. Was like being in a rural Mexico, but in the night in the radio, and the only TV I had was from Laredo, Texas. So this I think these experiences mark a lot of how we work. It's just a guess, but I think this is like a. It's not just, of course, there's a choice. You can elect many things about your creative process, but I think many things came with your body and your environment.
Yeah, I think that rings very true to me. I mean, there's a musicality in your writing, Leon, that one easily picks up, and you're a musician, you know, and you're absolutely right. I perceive things very much right through my eyes, and I live in right through my eyes. I mean, reading your work, I'm struck by that naturalness of rhythm, and also just kind of the audaciousness of the voice and the boldness of the voice, which I hugely admire, and which I don't feel I have. I'm aware that I am quite a cautious writer, and I'm a very self-conscious one. In particular, I think about things like voice and humor. And I think part of it is living in this weirdly fragmented society that we inhabit here. I have an enormous kind of fear of making embarrassing assumptions about parts of this world that I'm not familiar with, that I don't come from. There's a huge kind of cringe factor that I'm extremely self-conscious about, and perhaps that's true elsewhere as well, but I feel it very strongly in my own work. Yeah, I don't really have this huge drive to kind of ventriloquize other people, other characters, but I think I would like to become a little bit bolder about putting my own voice onto the page than I have been in the past. Yeah, I do tend to focus down on those small details, perhaps to the exclusion of the broader view and the bigger strokes.
Well, thank you very much for both of you. We have had this great conversation, but unfortunately we're just running out of time. But before we close this conversation, Julia, the new directora de la Cátedra Extraordinaria Carlos Fuentes, is going to talk some word with us. Thank you very much, Riet and Julian. I really enjoyed your books. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Armando. Thank you, Julian. Thank you, everybody. Bronwyn.
Thanks a lot. It was very fun. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Armando. And my deepest thanks to you, Henrietta, and to you, Julian. You've made such an intense and broad treatment of all these topics. I just wrote some of them, but there were many borders, how the cities change. And you talked about, I want to ask some question about this, about the future of the cities and the dystopia. You talked about land ownership and migration between countries, and then Julian very interestingly talked about inner migration in the same country, which is a very complex and enriching subject. You also talked about a subject that is very present in the narrative and the poetry and the essays in what is being written today, I dare say, all around the world, and is this motherhood and fatherhood issues that we all have. Julian said that regardless if you write about it or not, most surely you have them, because I feel we are facing like a very difficult time for parenthood. It's being questioned, and I think it's correct because it has been on a very feeble and fragile basis. And you also talked about resilience and gender, of course, one of the most important topics today in the world, and about sounds, ambition, and what you name, you name it. So thank you very much. I would just want to ask one question. How has your writing, both of you, Henrietta and Julian, how has your writing changed about the cities, in particular, writing about cities, changed with the pandemic? I'm sure you, as well as most of all of us, we see the world in a different way. We see ourselves, we see our friends, we see social contact, we see even maybe partnership in a different way. We have all been obliged to review our positions about all this topic. So I would like to focus on how has your writing about cities changed with the pandemic?
Well, I will answer with these two ideas. The first one is the concept of residual aesthetics. For me, the experience of this concept of residual architecture, I was working with that some years ago, and with pandemics, I have to do a lot of stuff in the stairs of my building, and I need to run, so I began to run in the rooftop of my building, and then I saw a lot of things there that are like residual narrative materials, and I was like constructing that. I made like a process, and I'm working with rhetorics, incorporating that kind of things. For example, like using genre in like informal genre to write, like the list of things to do, like a structure of narrative structure made by a list of things to do. This is like formal, like in the process of formality, and the other thing about, besides residual aesthetics, is like mental health and its relationship with the body. For me, what I needed is not just the city, but the body, and first the body, and the body placed in a city. And what I did to reconnect was to begin to train boxing. So I wrote a piece about how boxing helps us to reconnect, not just with the theme of pandemics, but the relationship between a father and a son, or with health problem, or depression for a loss, and so this is like a very practical ways for me to place the body in the city after pandemics.
Yeah, I think like almost everyone, I feel like my world has shrunk, and that has included my writing world. Before the pandemic, I had assumed that the arc of my writing, the course of my writing, was expansive, you know, both in terms of my own physical movement and experience of the world, and also in terms of the themes I was tackling, or had hoped to tackle, or planned to tackle. I had imagined it as expanding outwards, almost kind of concentrically from writing about my city. And with the pandemic, for one thing, I've become very, very aware how just pragmatically how my writing has been a vehicle and like a vector for me to explore the world mentally and just in a very physical sense, in that the writing has been the thing that has allowed me to see the rest of the world and to create networks with others across the world. And that has all shrunk quite dramatically. And just the focus of my thoughts has become kind of ever inward since the start of the pandemic, first to my neighborhood, my house, my room, and then with health issues, also again, circling in on the body, indeed, Julian. Although not quite, I haven't been quite as athletic as to take up boxing, I'm afraid. Maybe I should. But I have become, as we all have, very aware of kind of the microscopic worlds within us on the viral level. And I have become very aware of my own body in a medical sense. And this was not something ever I have been drawn to write about, but it feels like that's where the thoughts are congregating at the moment, and that's what feels most kind of valid to and real to me to write about right now. And I'm still hopeful that all of these this direction of movement can still be reversed, because the last thing I want to do is write about my own body. But perhaps sometimes you can't choose these directions. So we shall see.
Okay. Well, thank you again. Thank you, colleague Armando Velasquez. Thank you, Henrietta. And I insist, I love the way your name sounds. It's so
thank
euphonic.
you.
It sounds so euphonic to me. And thank you very much, Julian Herbert. We all are very thankful to you for holding this so interesting conversation and for opening doors and windows through which we can see the world in a different way. And thank you most of all, Arturo Mendoza, dear colleague in South Africa. Thank you for hosting this conversation with the Cátedra Carlos Fuentes. And we will meet again very soon, because we are both interested in these subjects, in translation, in the way we read the world through different languages. We read the world differently. A language is not just a way of saying things, but it's a way of understanding the whole world. I believe we agree in that. So thank you very much for this, and please forgive me again for the clumsy start. Technology doesn't always help. Sometimes it does just the contrary. But in any case, I just wanted to introduce myself to all of you. I'm Julia Santibáñez. I have a master's in literature and comparative literature. And as of yesterday, I'm taking the position of coordinator of the Cátedra Carlos Fuentes. So we'll be meeting here again soon in another conversation. And I leave you the word, Arturo Mendoza.
Thank you very much, Julia. Well, just to say thanks again, Julian, Henrietta, Armando, thank you very much. And obviously, Bronwyn, Carla, thank you very much for your invaluable work and collaboration in bringing this together. And thank you for all the people that were here as well. Thank you very much for your interest in these literary seminars.